Coming live from the PA Foundation, I'm James Millward. This is a special edition of Vital Minds, a podcast connecting the most vital issues in clinical care with the top minds facing them every day. We're doing something a little different and video broadcasting from Washington, D.C. today. Thanks for watching and joining us on this podcast. Now let's dive in. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, employment of PAs is expected to grow as much as 37% over the time period of 2016 to 2026, which is much faster than average for most occupations. In addition, in 2017, a survey of early career PAs held by the AAPA showed that PAs who are in their first 5 years of clinical practice are most likely to be interested in taking on leadership roles into their career. Our profession is in very high demand, and I'm very proud to see so much interest in PA leadership. But it does make me ask the question, what can this mean for PAs? What does this mean for our profession? Joining us today to discuss this is Andrea Lowe, PAC, MHA, and Vice President of Operations and Director of Advanced Practice Clinicians with Team Health, who recently joined the AAPA's Center for Healthcare Leadership and Management, the Center for Healthcare Leadership and Management, tongue twister there, as a consultant for advisory services. Andrea is currently pursuing her MBA at George Washington University and is passionate about leadership and development for PAs. Additionally, Andrea serves in her local community as the chair of the Leadership Committee and on the Diversity Committee for the New York State Society of PAs. Andrea, you are very busy, and we want to thank you so much for joining us today for this podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Now, I understand you are in charge of approximately 140 NPs and PAs in Houston, as well as running the emergency medicine and hospital medicine service lines in one of the largest healthcare systems in Houston. What inspired you to kind of team up and begin healthcare consulting for the CHLM, in addition to all of your many duties?
Well, I think, in working in big systems and in different hospitals, it's come to me to realize that there is definitely a gap of hospitals knowing how to build sustainable models for PAs and nurse practitioners, but most importantly, really learning how to use them as leaders effectively and building sustainable models. So that's one of the things that CHLM are very passionate about. So it just seems like a natural joint venture for me to do with them.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, the PA profession has evolved a lot over the last 50 years. PAs are practicing now in all 50 states and in all specialties. I know you have been closely watching kind of the trends in our profession. And how would you say the landscape has changed in terms of opportunities for PAs in today's healthcare environment?
Yeah, I think that the opportunities are limitless. 20 years ago when I started PA school and then started practicing a couple of years after that, I always had to walk into a patient's room and explain to them what a physician assistant is and let them know I'm not the scribe or I'm not the medical assistant. Now when you walk in a patient's room, they're like, oh yeah, geez, thank goodness, it's the PA. It's never is the real doctor coming. So I think just from that landscape, it's limitless, but also all of the different service lines that we have the opportunity, understanding that we can do leadership roles, we can be clinicians, we can be researchers. I think that our blueprint is massive and just would grow.
That makes sense, and I definitely have seen that recognition in my own kind of service in cardiovascular surgery, where rarely do I walk into a room and have to explain what I am as a PA. The patients seem to understand what we are and what we do at this point, which is a huge change from where it was historically.
Definitely.
Now, we've talked a little bit about how fast our profession is growing. What do you think is driving that?
I think that when people are patients and then they sort of are in hospitals and we are kind of on every service line, I think that they are becoming more aware of what the profession is. I also think they see the difference in the care because we're always known to sort of get the patient as a whole, take time with the patient. And many people now, just the way that the economy is, are going on their second career. So I think the fact that our profession is growing, we're having a great reputation, it really is becoming the career to want to have.
I agree. And additionally, I think just as a nation, we see there's this physician/provider shortage, and PAs are very well suited to fill that role that is so needed all over, especially in kind of rural America and in these very suburban communities that don't have the advantage of some of the very large hospitals that you get in major cities.
Yeah, totally agree. Especially here in Texas, we have tons of critical access hospitals where the PA is there by themselves for 24 hours running the show, and always happy and very cool to see that. And I think that's really going to be the trend as we go further in the future.
Definitely. Now, in your opinion, what do you think makes PAs so vital to a healthcare team?
Yeah, so I think just to piggyback of what I said earlier, the fact that we're sort of trained a little differently to look at the patient as a whole, so take into consideration the socioeconomic picture, the behavioral health picture. We're always the one that are asking the pharmacist, hey, how is this person going to get their meds? And reminding the physicians, that person has no way to get the meds when you discharge them. So I think we are always trained to be sort of global thinkers and really understand what needs to happen and next steps and forecast. And I see it all the time, when you're in disciplinary rounds. A lot of times it's the PA to say, hey, did you think about this? And they're like, oh, yeah, we totally didn't think about that. So I think that's one of the unique things about our practice and the way that we're taught. And I think that's getting recognized as we join more teams and kind of come up the ranks.
I'd agree. I think that general practice training that we have and that we're certified in suits us very well to give a good baseline no matter what specialty you kind of end up choosing that you want to pursue. Now, in your career, you're obviously very passionate about diversity and mentorship of these early career PAs. And I'm sure you've seen a lot of examples of people pursuing the PA career in a non-traditional path. I know I was one of those people that had a career in research first, and then I decided to come into the PA and clinical life. What are some other examples that you've seen of this kind of non-traditional path?
Yeah, so now you see PAs either running a hospital or they're working for pharmaceutical companies, clinical prepping, doing education. And the cool thing is that a lot of people are doing all three at once. And that's kind of where we are unique again, because we can kind of maneuver in and out and do those different things. So I think there's so many venues and avenues that you take once you figure out what it is you want to do. And so there's so many non-traditional roles. And one of the other things, too, is that, you don't always have to go for that vice president of operations director role. You can be a leader in multiple facets, and I think that's important.
No, I agree. I'm right there with you. I practice in CV surgery, but I'm also very involved in research, and I host a podcast. So now, what pointers would you say you have for people that are thinking about leadership, and especially for the early career PAs, the PA students that are just beginning their journey? How would you set yourself up for success in leadership and to make a positive impact around you?
Yeah, so I think one of the most important things is to think about it. It's that fine balance, but don't necessarily rush it. Get your sea legs first, know what your clinical practice is, and get that foundation, because that's going to propel anything you do, no matter what avenue you go. So I always think it's important to sort of focus on really getting to know, like, what I call your medicine first. And then if you do figure out that leadership is the way that you want to, get a mentor, be that person that starts to go to a lot of hospital committees. That really gets your feet wet of looking at how meeting cadences gets you comfortable presenting, and sort of having an executive presence per se, and having those conversations as well. And then you could really see if it's for you, right? Because a lot of times people are like, oh, I want to do this, and then they go to the meetings, it's like, oh my goodness, this is like very boring, or I have no interest in it. But I think it's important to sort of get your real time and also get a mentor. That is like one of the most.
I agree. The mentorship is huge to have someone that, can help kind of lay some groundwork and show you how to do some things in an effective way, I think is very important as you're starting your career. Now let's talk about kind of volunteering, right? So that's kind of another side of service that we do as providers. I had a discussion with someone earlier. They were saying, I'm a hospitalist. What sort of volunteer opportunities should I be looking for in my community or around me as a PA?
So I always say, again, go back to, when you volunteer with a purpose of making sure it really connects to something that you want to do. Because A, if you're volunteering, obviously you're giving your time, and to give your time to something that's not purposeful really is not going to be meaningful. So my first thing is always tell people, what avenue do you want to take? Do you want to teach? So then, volunteer with something that has to do teaching to get your feet wet. I think volunteering with organizations like, the PAEA, even doing AAPA events, going to conference and volunteering, those are all ways to make great connections, meet. That way you can brainstorm and have those conversations. And you'll be surprised. Like sometimes you don't know what you want to do, and then you start doing all these different things, and then it just sort of comes to you.
Definitely. I've fallen into that myself quite a bit. So now let's talk kind of education and training a little bit for leadership, because there is, in some instances, it is very beneficial to get some extra education, some extra training. What kind of resources, be it seminars or degrees, do you feel like are useful for PAs that are trying to kind of further their career in that way?
Yeah, so I think it's important to go to things like CHLM, the Executive Leadership Conference. I think things like that. APEX has great conferences. I definitely think it's important to do some conferences or even day workshops with something like, the American College of Health Executives, things like that first, because then you can kind of see, like, okay, I think I'm liking this. I think I like the conversations that are happening. And I think it's important to do that since there's so many resources for that first before thinking about an MHA or MPH or an MBA, because those are huge commitments. And you sort of, again, I always say do everything with a purpose. You want to make sure that you're going in whichever track you are, sort of with a purpose of what you want.
Yeah, definitely. You got to have a goal in mind when you start taking on the extra education. There's a lot of money involved in that education. Now, well, as one example of those, I know the AAPA has a leadership and advocacy summit every year, and that is one example of a great type of conference to go to get ideas and see where you actually want to go with things.
Right.
Now,
super important.
Yeah. Now, if you could leave our viewers, and especially the early career PAs and students, with one piece of advice, what would that be?
I think one of the important things is, as I said before, enjoy the part of taking care of patients and the clinical part, because that goes by so quickly. I felt like it was just yesterday where I just graduated and I was scared starting, my first job, and taking care of my own patient. And then like now it's fast forward already 18 years. So enjoy that part, because that's what you went to school for. Everything else, like I said, will come naturally, but live in that moment and learn medicine and enjoy it for all the things that it can afford you, and then all the opportunities, because people pick up on what you're passionate about. People pick up on if you're just doing this for the money, or you're doing genuinely care and want somebody to either get well or make a difference in your population health. People will pick up on that. So like what you do and be meaningful what you do, but also enjoy it, because the time flies by. And that would be really, my sound advice for someone who's graduating is, especially in the first 2 to 3 years, really just enjoy seeing it.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think patients can definitely see it. You got to love what you do. They can feel that. Well, Andrea, it's been great having you as our guest today on the Vital Minds podcast. Your insight into our profession is very valuable, and it gives us a lot to think about. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. And
with that, we'll wrap up this special edition of Vital Minds. Be sure to visit our website, pa-foundation.org, to learn about multiple alternative career pathways for PAs, and to check up on all of our previous episodes of the Vital Minds podcast. The PA Foundation is the philanthropic arm of the American Academy of PAs. Our mission is to empower PAs to improve health through philanthropy and service. We would like to thank the American Academy of PAs for sponsoring this edition of the Vital Minds podcast. Until next time, everyone, I'm James Millward, and this is Vital Minds.